afternoon. I would like to call to order this January 13th, 2022 meeting of the Evansville Vanderburgh Public Library Board of Trustees. And our first order of business is election of officers for the 2022 year. The slate of officers was presented to the entire board members 50 days prior, which is part of our board policy. And the slate is myself, Belinda Stubbs, president, vice president Eric Williams, secretary Richard Clements, and treasurers Sabrina Stewart Thomas. I would call for a motion for acceptance of the slate.
So moved.
Do we have a second?
Second.
We have a motion and a second. A second for accepting that slate of officers. Hearing none, all those in favor of accepting the slate of officers as presented, please signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Those opposed, nay. And that carries. I don't believe we have any visitors present other than our presentation that'll be later. So we'll move on through that. Correspondence, we do have one correspondence, and this is from Birthright of Evansville, so I'll pass that around for other board members to review. Next on the agenda is our consent agenda. Do we have a motion to accept the consent agenda?
I move to accept.
We got a motion, do we have a second?
Second.
A motion and a second to accept the consent agenda. All those in favor or any discussion?
I do have just two things real quick. One, in the director's report, I wanted to also, there are a lot of instances of staff who have covered and helped out for taking extra shifts during the holiday. I want to commend everyone for that. And then there is in the director's report also a mention of EVPL being the test library for Urban Libraries Council. And I was wondering if Scott could just speak a little bit to flesh that out a little bit, what that entails.
And this is now Heather McNabb's project, but we were asked to act as a test library for the Urban Library Council's Edge 360 program on equity and diversity. So what we are is one of, I believe, 8 libraries nationwide where we're basically doing self-evaluation on our organization and return that information back to them to try and build guidelines for other libraries across the country to expand their equity and diversity initiatives within their libraries.
Are there specific data points they're looking at?
They actually had us fill out a survey of what we're currently doing now, what we're planning to do in the future. And so we can compare and contrast and what kind of tools we need to be successful with our staff issues that we face, those types of things that were all done in an initial survey.
Good deal. So I know that in the MKM presentation, it mentions equitable services several times. Do these coincide?
Yes, they all tie into that in relation to facilities and services and everything that our public libraries do here at Evansville.
These pilots are specific to currently. So we used the EDGE project already for our technology needs, and we've used it for many years. So it's very standard. These are testing anti-racism standards and frameworks and digital equity standards and frameworks, which of course throughout COVID has become an issue to try to look at digital equity in our community. So these are very specific to those two issues. Some of them are very fleshed out at this time, and other parts of the assessment they're still building. So there's a programming piece that hasn't been built. This was really about your statements, your foundational work. Are you explicit in this work that you're trying to do digital equity work, and you want to be an anti-racist library? So we actually have a debrief meeting. Everyone, there are 20 libraries across the United States. We have a debrief meeting, I believe, on February 1st to kind of look at where everybody landed and to talk about the program.
Yeah, this initial step is building that first initial baseline.
I get a couple questions following up on that. Similar question on that. equality, equity, and I'm aware of sort of the difference between them. But what does it mean specifically? Just some points of what a digital equity is, or what an equity initiative would mean with collaborative.
So it could mean a lot of different things. It depends on how you want to take it. Like I said, this instance is around digital equity specifically. So equitable access to digital materials, digital tools, Wi-Fi, all those things that we saw during COVID. Can people actually reach the services they need if they say, oh, we're all online now? Do they have the tools to do that? Do you have broadband in the area? Is there a coalition in your region working on broadband or something like that? Those are some of the questions that were asked in the digital equity. Equity in general, that's kind of why they broke out anti-racism, because that is a big word to try to tackle and say, how are you handling equity? So they really wanted to focus right now on the anti-racism piece and the digital equity to see how they go and where they may go from there. When Zach talks about equitable access, you can correct me if I'm wrong, sir. We're really looking about the equity of, can you maneuver through the building? Do you have equitable access to even get yourself to a library? So that's why when you look at where our locations are placed, are they on a MEDS line? Do people have transportation? Some of those demographics are in the report about transportation areas, problems in the area, or issues, I should say problems. So, and equitable access, of course, on our website, which Cassidy handles very well. And not just can you get to the website, but once you get to the website, can you read it the way that you need to read it? Can you see it if you are colorblind? What do the colors look like? Can you increase the font? All of those fall under the very broad umbrella of equity and equitable access to materials. Of course, at the foundation, equitable access is we give free library cards so that people can have access to our materials. And we want to stay that way in that equitable access as well. Big umbrella. The Edge is just working on those two right now. Does that sort of make sense?
It seemed like it blurs accessibility with equity, and equity seemed like more than all sorts of things.
It really can. It definitely can. That's why they wanted to kind of pull out these two pieces and look at that, rather than just saying we're trying to create equitable libraries, because there are so many pieces and so many moving parts to it. You kind of need to look at it individually. As we have our comparison report, I'm happy to share that with you guys. It's nothing that we want to hide from our staff or from anyone, to see where we are, where we're going to go, how we're going to work on things. That's the plan of the work, just to be very transparent with our staff and how we can move it forward. So I will continue to update you guys as we move forward.
I've got one of the governance and the Roy's group. There was a comment in there about working with Baker Tilly and some meetings we had with them. That brought to mind, how close are we paid off with the outstanding bonds?
No, so we had one general obligation bond that retired in 2021. Our leasing corps, the ones that our leasing corporation holds, those two don't retire until 2023. So we still have those, and those are still part of our bond interest redemption fund budget. And so we're still getting levy taxes for that particular fund. The comment in the director's report about working with Baker Tilly is completely separate.
Okay.
It is about, the State Board of Accounts is now requiring us to depreciate our capital assets. Basically, if you haven't been doing it since the beginning of time, up until the end of 2020, so then we can make adjustments to our capital assets that are reported to the state. And then in 2021, we'll apply our depreciation methods so that we're up to date. And so we have never depreciated anything at the library because we haven't had to. And so I've spoken to another section of Baker Tilly, another group of accountants, about how do we go about depreciating, how do we get to that point? And they're assisting us with that.
Any other discussion regarding the consent agenda? We have a motion and a second to accept the consent agenda as presented. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Carries. I do want to go back to the election, and this was on my part. I neglected to talk about committee appointments. Since we have a new board member and would like to welcome Robert Musgrave to the board, and that was a fairly recent appointment. We'll be doing committee appointments at February's meeting with the approval of the board. Just wanted, we don't have to follow that. Just one, that we will be doing those committee appointments next time. Moving on to governance, Lori.
So in your packet, before I get to the actual resolution to transfer funds to the rainy day fund, I want to just quickly go through our year end. I thought that makes sense to put it down lower in the finance report and then jump around. So you'll see at the end of 20, and because of the way it printed, you can't see the property tax that was received in the month of December because the column wasn't wide enough. However, for the year, we did receive the $8,582,000. That's for both and December settlements for a total for that total. And if you look at the far right-hand column that says anticipated revenue, that was what we were anticipating based on our budget order and the 1782 notice we received at the end of 2020, beginning of 2021. And then taking into account our circuit breaker tax credits from the tax cap law and some other items that the appeals, shortfalls, etc. And so at the end, we were still a little bit short of what we anticipated. And in total, we had our levy that was certified cut by 20% based on the property tax caps. So I wanted to point that out. Overall, we did really well, though. If you look at our anticipated revenue at the very bottom in total, we actually then received in the second column under 1/1 through 12/31, just a little bit over that as far as overall revenue, places where we weren't anticipating it. We implemented our scan fax machines this year, which are faxes, so that was a nice little bit of income that we received that we hadn't anticipated. One other area you'll note in red where we fell short of our certified budget and what we actually put forward to the DLGF was in the interest from investments, and we were 58% short of budget. But again, we were budgeting, we cut the budget from the prior year, knowing that our investments were hoping they'd break out a little bit better than it did. But trust me, and it's still not paying out as we hear month to month, a lot of it. So on the expenditure side, we got down to 12%. We spent up to 12. We had 12% of our budget left at the end of the year, which is a significant decrease. And we worked really hard to get to that point. Theoretically, you would use your entire budget, but because a lot of things like utilities that you can't predict what they're going to be, we had some things, some items that were on purchase orders or that we thought would be, the invoices would be coming in before the end of December, and we did not encumber them, did not, so we fell a little short in a couple different areas. But overall, we were within 12% of what we budgeted, which is a huge improvement over prior years. So we had income over expenditures initially of $1,091,000, and our encumbrances. Sorry, you don't see a header on the column, but the column that is in the middle, that's $1,791,124.70. That is the balance or remainder of our budget, our appropriation budget. So if you take that minus our encumbrances, minus what we'll be proposing to move to rainy day, we'll still have $944,000 of unused, unencumbered funds in our operating fund. And if you look at then the cash increase before the transfer of $1 million minus the transfer, that would still leave us a net cash increase in our operating fund of the year for $341,000. And we are allowed to take up to 10% of the original budget of, as long as it's not encumbered or used. So that's where we took the 1,790,000. So with that being said, we'd like to present to the board this resolution to transfer library operating funds to the rainy day fund in the amount of $750,000.
Thank you, Lori, for that explanation at our end of the year. So do we have a motion to accept this resolution to transfer funds to rainy day?
I'll move.
And a second? A motion and a second. Any discussion or questions?
I do have a question for Lori about that. Just making sure I'm following you. So anything that hasn't been encumbered or expended, we're requesting transfer to rainy day fund. There won't be any additional appropriation.
Correct.
Okay.
As you can see at the bottom of that page, the 10% would equate to 1,444,000. So about half of that is what we are asking to move to rainy day.
What is it for besides this point that
So there's some history behind what we use our rainy day fund for. Back in 2013, when the property tax cap laws really hit us hard and our circuit breaker tax credits were over $1 million, now reaching almost $1.9 million. We have utilized our rainy day to help offset not just unexpected events or repairs to our buildings. We've also used it to help actually upgrade our buildings because we couldn't budget for it in our operating fund in order to keep our operating fund within the confines of what we had to not overspend what we were bringing in income. And so we installed the temperature controls at all of our locations and with our HVAC units. We have actually replaced HVAC units at 2 of our locations out of the rainy day fund. So as things like that come up, we try to look at, do we have the ability to spend that out of our operating fund versus our rainy day fund? Somewhat, yes.
Then what was 750,000? Bring us the total.
I'll have to look at our investments. It'll bring us up to 3,500,000, 600,000.
Any other questions or discussion? Hearing none. We have a motion and a second to accept the resolution to transfer funds to the rainy day fund. All those in favor, signify by saying aye.
Aye.
And that passes. Thank you, Lori. And report of appropriations.
So the December 31st appropriations report that's in your packet, you'll see that it's basically the same information, only condensed down into some of the major categories. Again, we ended the year with a 12% balance of unexpended budget appropriation dollars.
And then report of investments.
Our report of investments also as of December 31st for all 4 funds is $14,678,500. And that does include our December tax settlement that we moved into investments before the end of the year. Our daily average yield for December was 0.0712, which is up 113 tenth or however you say that since November, and our average daily yield for the year to date is 0.0611, or up 3,000 of a percentage point.
Right up there. All right, next on the agenda is approval of bills. Sabrina.
Yes, can you hear me? Can you hear me?
Yes.
Oh, okay, all right. So I move for approval of invoices dated December the 8th of 2021 through January 13th of 2022 for $1,923,075.21. And for payroll of December the 3rd for $242,382.36, December 17th, $243,596.51, and December the 30th, $300,000 $80,706.46.
And I assume that's in the form of a motion.
Yes, for approval.
Do we have a second?
Second.
We have a motion and a second to accept the approval of bills. Any discussion?
I have a question on, on the check registry check. Check 033663 for Ingram, accurate, inclusive, edit, or EDI audit. Is that part of the 360 EDI?
That is a piece of it, yes.
What is that?
What that was, Ingram is one of our book vendors that we purchase books from. And what we did is we had them do a collection analysis of all 700,000 items of our books to see how we rank with inclusivity of titles.
What is that?
It means what is the breadth of our titles for titles that relate to African American culture, Asian culture, Hispanic culture, both in nonfiction and in fiction. Do we have those types of materials, and they compare us and contrast us to other libraries across the country? And then they give us suggested titles that we could purchase if we don't already have them, or if our titles have been weeded out or basically come in disrepair and we for some reason did not reorder them. So it's basically a collection audit, making sure that we have availability of these titles.
And then that's based off of nationwide averages.
Yes, nationwide data, yes.
Any other discussion? All right, we have a motion and a second to approve the bills. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Those opposed, nay. And that passes. We'll move on to other business.
Good evening. I think Tuesday, you got a draft copy of our final report. The hope with our presentation tonight was to not rearrange that content in any way, try to walk through as quickly as we could the actual report itself, just to kind of give you some clarity on what our thought process was on its organization, recommendations. Open it up for any questions. So feel free to interrupt me as I go, or I'll pause something.
Would you guys mind turning your mics off, please?
All right. So, good. How about that? How about that? Excellent.
Can't read the slide.
How about that? Better?
Can the camera be adjusted so that I could see the video? If not, I mean, see the screen. If not, then that's fine. Oh yeah, that's good. Thank you.
they're all Is that the one? Okay.
Yeah.
All right, sorry. So inclusivity and diversity, I think, is just making statistics. I understand where some of the geographic areas in these neighborhoods are going. Where they might be headed.
Darren, you need.
I turned the mic off too.
Sorry.
Go ahead. Which one did you want? Number 9? There you go.
So the next thing that is a big chunk of the appendix to that report is the responses we got from the survey. So the last 7 months, the first 3 to 4 months were dedicated to listening. In that time, we had over 700 survey responses, did over 20 interviews, had 10 focus groups with staff, and even conducted a virtual town hall. So the response was good despite COVID. Couple of things that I think in summary, and I can get into any more detail of interest of anyone here. Not surprising, in vast majority of the survey responses were complimentary to staff. That's not uncommon. Good libraries are good libraries because people want to visit with staff, not necessarily access the collection. The other thing that was interesting of it was 70% of the respondents visit the library at least once a month. So they're in that dependable category. So they're seeing the library and the staff on a pretty regular basis. Here's a profile of those respondents. You can kind of see here on the left how often they're using the library, and these are the ones that responded to the survey. The others you can see by location, which I think is helpful, and it's fairly proportional to the user group. Everyone still claimed the collection is their largest reason for the visit. There's a lot of research trying to depict what the logic and psychology behind that, but they're still accessing the stuff in the library. So the rest of this is dedicated to this idea of trying to define a facility framework in hopes that it could do a couple things. One is react to everything we heard in the first 3 to 4 months of the planning effort, but also try to overlay that with what we know libraries are evolving as community and anchor institutions within communities that are similar to Evansville. So we spent a lot of time, especially in the community open houses last time we were here, talking about the value proposition of libraries, specifically trying to understand how they can interact across 3 key assets. Understanding the people side of it, that the public library is a hub for civic engagement and fostering relationships. And what does that mean? The library is a physical place that's welcoming space for a wide range of individuals and allows opportunities for people of all ages and abilities. And then it is a platform that is user-centered, that the patrons have some ownership in the culture and the trajectory of it as an institution. And while some of these don't permeate through the final recommendations, they would be part of all the tactics we would recommend to follow any of the strategies that we outlined here. The other thing is trying to understand the library's role as a third place. This is starting to be a little bit more well-known way to think about libraries. So if I haven't given this speech before, third places are, first place is home, second place is work, and third place is like the cheer song everybody knows your name. Like the idea that the library is a place that you're not only going to because of a good or a service, but for some social interaction and emotional connection. And understanding not only how that becomes part of the utility of that retail experience, that's why they're coming, but understanding the proposition and the value that the library provides offering that interaction and what value does that bring to the larger community. and that becomes increasingly important, especially when we're dealing with epidemics of social determinants of health and chronic loneliness. Trying to understand the library's role in those discussions. And then lastly, we spent some energy talking about it as an anchor institution. So trying to understand how you take those three assets, this identity as a third place, and really leverage your facilities, these locations as physical anchors within the neighborhoods they serve, and really try to understand what that means in a modern context to be a civic institution that's respectful and responsible in serving these different communities, these different neighborhoods around the county. So we organize it around these three guiding principles, and we've kind of set these early on in the design phase, but they were based on three real key recommendations. One was we wanted to support and serve all people by increasing the library's ability to provide meaningful resources and experiences for a diverse collection of patrons, trying to understand what that meant and how it was different at each location. Establish equitable places, enhance the library's ability to provide places that are accessible to a variety of people with different events and access to different types of collection. And then third is to create these wonderful platforms. So this idea of it being a platform, but also strengthen the library's ability to cultivate curiosity through these platforms dedicated to creating wonder, which is the most unique mission statement of any library ever. That's your all's mission statement. So we didn't want to lose sight of that in trying to develop some of the strategies for these different locations. The other thing that we don't necessarily outline or repeat in each location recommendation is there's some system-wide strategies that we think are important. One is meeting room capacity. A lot of the locations, especially at the regional and definitely the neighborhood, are lacking a diverse set of places, spaces, and rooms to provide meetings, especially that 4 to 6 person event, which is kind of that sweet spot of those locations. The other thing that really at every location, even the facilities that have meeting rooms, they have them in a way that it's hard to understand there's something going on in those meeting rooms from the general collection. This one's probably the most extreme example. You could have 100 people in here having a really vibrant, engaging activity, and I could come in, get a book, and leave and never know something actually interesting was happening here. That doesn't help in trying to promote new users to understand what really goes on in the library. And every location currently has that with it. And it's an abandoned methodology where kind of isolate out these meeting rooms so that they could be functioning after hours and they have their own entrance. But what it does by default then is it separates it from the general traffic of the library. So no matter what interesting, vibrant things are on here, the casual user who doesn't necessarily use it on a regular basis doesn't understand, what's going on here. My favorite example is when we missed Red Bank by a day, I missed a llama. There's a llama there for whatever reason. I don't even know why. There was a llama there. But the way the meeting was positioned, I could have walked in, got a hook and left, and never known I walked by a llama. And that is, I think, it's important, is trying to understand how to define these spaces, is position them in a way that people get an understanding of what type of activities are normalized within the library space.
We're right across the street. Our offices are, and recently we were looking for ways to meet in, a little bit larger group, but still be able to socially distance. And, brought up, Linda and I, that the library has rooms available, and it was surprising to some.
Yeah. So trying to understand that, and then if you give these rooms to some of these facilities, trying to make sure staff understands the importance of building these partnerships with groups that use them, that leverage them, putting your retail hat on, reaching out and saying, you could host your board meetings in our meeting room. And just trying to understand that as a marketing tool for the library.
Does every branch have to have equal meeting rooms, equal technology, or can we get by first ones, neighborhoods have different mixed and
Correct.
regional ones?
Yeah, I think every branch probably needs at least 1 or 2 that can serve 4 to 6 people. That's the growing need across the board, especially at one-to-one tutoring, study rooms, supervised visitation. But like the neighborhood ones, I would have a different need than the regional. Regionals have a much larger need, I think, for those small meeting rooms. So there's meeting room capacity, access to the collection, trying to understand how to make sure that the collection itself is accessible, both physically, but also cognitively. So we talk a lot in this report about cognitive wayfinding, just making sure people understand intuitively how to get to things. 5-year-olds don't understand the food decimal system, they know where their books are. And they do it through architectural cues. So trying to understand how the building can help make it a little bit more logical where parts of the collection are so they feel more accessible and open to the public. Functional technology is an ever-moving target, but trying to understand how we can segment out a strategy by facility to make sure that we understand how we're prioritizing technology, both access to Wi-Fi, but also there's some recommendations here on makerspace here in the central branch, but building management capabilities for understanding how to supervise all the buildings. We don't currently have a building management platform. Lighting upgrades, security, and AV capabilities across the board.
I noticed one of your recommendations, or one of the things you put was wayfinding, like you said. I find it interesting, even especially in a large space like this, like when you go to a shopping mall or something like that, we used to have the kiosk right off the bat, so you bang in the door, who are here. To direct you to.
So signage is different than wayfinding.
Okay.
So signage works for about 20% of the population. About 20% of us are responsible enough to actually look at the map and say, you were here. The rest just kind of wander aimlessly until they find what they're looking for and complain the whole time. So you need that. You still don't want to off-put that 20%. But I think you also have to appreciate the fact that most people pass through physical space by landmarks. So try to, like the boat, right? In the children's department. That's a landmark for a child. They know where their stuff is relative to that. That's the North Star. So to try to understand how that works within each building and on each site for a neighborhood, I think is as important as making sure that we have accessible signage. And we can provide a whole series of recommendations. There's also a whole litany of research on signage specifically to make sure that it can help with people on the autism spectrum, but also early onset dementia. Signage becomes really problematic for those populations if it's not done right. And then the last is inclusive placemaking, which is everything we're just talking about. So to us, those were things that I think we could start to think about at every location with no exception. We also then try to understand these recommendations based on location and segment them out into 4 different categories. Neighborhood, regional, and central, which are currently how we classify buildings, but also these micro locations, which would be a potential strategy for underserved areas that I don't think quite yet and maybe never will warrant a bricks and mortar location. But still, I think need access to some type of service and maybe more importantly, brand recognition, that they understand the library is something that they can interact with in their daily routine. So that's a partnership with story time at a coffee shop where there's the library's logos in the window for the day. That's a micro location for a moment where it's a pop-up library experience where we're still providing some value in those underserved areas, but not necessarily saying that we need to plan a bricks and mortar branch location.
No, I was beating a dead horse. It seemed like pushing the retail area, but did any of the reviews seem like that made any sense here of small retail space, rental retail space for the, well, instead of building something, leasing for a year, 2 years in retail spaces.
So the way we try to, spoiler alert, there's recommendations here for new spaces. Right, yeah.
Correct.
We try to write them so that you also could use it as a space program that you could apply for leasable space and not necessarily a new location.
Yeah.
So it wasn't intended to be a design for a new building, but here's an organization of how much space you would need.
Gotcha.
And
Proportion
proportion
the other way.
and proportion will matter.
Gotcha.
Saying it's just 20,000 square foot in the library doesn't work. If it's big, long, and skinny, it doesn't, it won't work. So in our mind, we try to keep that so it gave the library some flexibility, but at least define the need so that they can understand what exhaust the options that they have. The other thing that we did, we weren't trying to put a big detailed budget on this because especially if this is going to be a 20-year plan. Prices today are not prices next week, more or less 19 years from now. But in 2022 dollars, we were trying to segment out, you know, what are some quick wins? What would be a moderate expense versus what would be a real strategic substantial? At least differentiate them by those scales. So I'll go through this as slow or fast as you like. Micro locations, here's those green dots on that map that could be potential strategies for these underserved locations. Everything from these hold lockers, if you know what these are. It's like books on hold at the library, but it's an external kiosk. They can be even outside. They can be analog where staff loads them. They can be digital, and they're really pretty slick and costly. All the way down to, you know, you're seeing a lot more growth in bookmobile again. Trying to understand how to do that, whether it's the collection or even mobile classroom on wheels. Trying to go out in partnership with schools to visit and engage some of those neighborhoods. All the way to these kind of micro library cultural hubs, which is really just a small house. You know, it's 150 square foot room, but it's branded with a library partnership maybe with someone else. And it's essentially a place to do books on hold like this kiosk would do, but also a place for teens to come after school and hang out for 3 hours a day. Most of those times, those are only successful when they're in partnership with another civic institution, another group that help with management and operation of it.
Zach, one of the things I was thinking as I read through this, especially on those overall recommendations about access to the collections in the library lockers, looking at that, I thought about a school location. Do our students have access to the library's collections without having to travel to a library? So through a bookmobile, you know, could we fill up lockers? I don't even think that space in our schools that is dedicated to media services already, you know, could I, as a high school student, get online, I'll do the research for my book report, and I need these materials. Could I essentially order them and they be in my school library tomorrow?
Yeah, and I think this last one, this idea of partnerships is where the real innovation will come. Just trying to go, it used to be school libraries and public libraries like this for a while, and now it's kind of a mix. I have some communities where they work really well together, and others where they don't. We have another community we work with right now that does doorstep delivery like Amazon. Which one will send a courier out to drop off your house. So that's an expense and a staffing issue, but these are solvable problems that just take a little ingenuity. So I'll kind of go through these at a real high level. So each branch, each location got its own set of assessments. There's more detail in the exhibit on the actual facility assessment, and then recommendations of those 3 different tiers. So at West, we're really trying to understand some of the quick wins of signage. There's some issues with fire alarm systems, maintenance issues.
And I promised the rest of the board that I think this is the last question I wrote down. I just wanted to make sure on these fire alarm systems, and this came up, this is somewhere else in the report. It says, I wrote down page 10, but I didn't see it. Lack of fire alarms in the report. Do we have I mean, are we out of compliance anymore?
No, nothing's out of compliance.
Okay.
What you run into is,
Yeah,
what you run into is
Right.
buildings of a certain age that are grandfathered in.
Don't have a
They just
sprinkler
don't
system.
have it. So if we're gonna come in and do something in a building, I'd recommend doing some of this stuff. We wanna make sure you don't forget it.
And probably by law, if we do a certain amount of renovation, we have to do
You
it.
do enough to require an architect to stamp drawings. There's certainly you have to bring it to code. Like accessible bathrooms. A lot of them don't meet current code, but are grandfathered in, some even are still technically be allowed to hold.
Yeah, and some of those, then that comes up with that historic.
Correct. Correct. So the hope here is to try to transition some of this new circulation space, trying to open this up, provide some meeting room space. In both west and east, the proposal is to eventually consider an expansion to the rear of the building, also preserving that historic front facade. In both cases, the site, I think, would allow that. What this does is it gives us an opportunity to provide an ADA accessible entrance with an elevator, a unisex ADA accessible restroom, some additional small meeting room spaces, and children's gets a small story time area off their children's area on the upper floor. Lower level gives us some additional office space, a break room, and an ADA to solve that rear.
Would that remove the parking?
What's that?
Wouldn't that remove the parking?
So on West, so this is all you own right now at West. City owns the rest of the park. What our hope was that in transition of this, that the city would allow us to help reconfigure some of this parking here to make that possible. But yes, it would go into your property. The addition stays on your property, but we'd have to work with the parks department to make sure we could include some more additional parking there. So similar recommendations at East, with the exception that we also think there should be some serious consideration of understanding how we can activate some of this acreage here. That is our property right now. So and because they're identical to Carnegie's, our recommendation will be an identical addition to both that meets the historic preservation standards. Stringtown, you can look at the feasibility assessment of the existing building. It does have some challenges. It's technically currently ADA accessible, most of which was done for the accessibility would meet current accessibility code. The entrance ramp is too steep, it's too narrow. It's fine now, but in terms of trying to understand how to position this as an inclusive facility 20 years in the future, there's a lot of challenges here. Our recommendation was to at least explore the possibility of providing a new location within the same service area, so within the Stringtown neighborhood. This allows us to either repurpose the existing library for maintenance, storage, admin, or offload the asset entirely to the neighborhood. We looked at trying to understand if we could build a new branch parking lot, raise the existing building, but I don't think there's enough space on the current site to do that. So here, similar to the regional locations, we try to get some criteria for site selection. Again, could be renovation of existing space, whether it's by ownership or lease, but it gives you at least some requirements or recommendations for what kind of site we're looking for. At the neighborhood level, what the focus is on walkability, trying to understand how the intimate scale of the neighborhood library could stay intact even with a new location. So here, in a similar vein with the regional, this was intended just to be a square foot space program to understand, in a prototypical sense, how much space we're looking at and how would that space then be allocated. So depending on partnerships with other organizations in terms of parking, whether it's shared or private, we're looking at about 1 to 2 acres, 10,000 square feet, which gives us a collection size roughly 20 to 30,000 items and a meeting room capacity total, adding up all the different types of rooms, like somewhere between 30 and 40.
It's amazing just how big the footprint for staff utility space is.
And that's everything, tech service, mechanical, but that's why I think this is helpful to show that. And to your comment, if you could find a lease space, when the camp comes off, it can change. But this hopefully would work as a planning tool, whether or not you're renting something or building share. We also try to give some examples of what I think priorities should be in the design of that, just so this group had that. The 3 priorities I think at the neighborhood level is making sure it's flexible, it's connected to the neighborhood, and it keeps that neighborhood scale. There's a difference aesthetically and psychologically between a pitched roof and a flat roof. Embedded in a historic neighborhood, I think you need to be sensitive to that if you want it to be a welcoming part of a neighborhood, which is totally different discussion at the regional scale. Moving into the regional locations, McCullough has some challenges to the site. It's essentially landlocked. It currently has already had an addition put on it. I think to do another one would be costly. So here we were trying to understand how we could reorganize the library in a way that would increase its utilization and busyness without adding square footage to the building. So things like consolidating circulation desks. There's really 2 big desks here now. We have some meeting rooms here that we have transitioned into office space, try to turn those back into meeting rooms, try to designate a YA space as best we could that had some of its own autonomy. And the way we did this was with kind of a major move of putting a new meeting room in the adult side of the library taking over that existing meeting room for children, because that's the one area in this building that really is underserved and underutilized. What this does is it allows that meeting room to still be by the main entrance, seeing all that activity when you come in. Children can easily access it without tracing 20 kids through the adult collection area. But there's a lot more permeability here to the building for line of sight and staff efficiency. Then we took part of that whole kind of dog-like portion of the addition and reappropriated some of that office space and consolidated it behind the circ desk. North Park and Oakland, we provided strategies for. We didn't assign any substantial moves here. They're two of the newest and really well-functioning facilities, but there were some things that we thought are worth at least exploring. The bigger ones are trying to understand how we can utilize some of these alcoves or the existing architecture and transition those into meeting rooms. I think we can do that with a pretty little small footprint disturbance, especially because this building is built on a raised floor, it's a platform floor. So I think that would add a lot of utility to how this building is being used. The other is to centralize that circulation desk. Right now it sits here to help get line of sight here and here, but also to try to welcome this idea of more engaged outdoor plaza, even considering another pedestrian entrance off that intersection from the school as opposed to everyone walking around the building coming in the opposite side. But lastly here was to try to understand how we could include a unisex restroom. Right now we have two gendered multi-hole restrooms, multi-stall restrooms there. You don't have a family changing room, which we would highly recommend at least having one in a facility this size. Similar at Oakland, trying to understand what we could do to help just position this to be successful for the next 20 years. One is to understand how we can open up a line of sight from the existing circulation desk. There's a wall here right now that's got some display cases in it. You can kind of see through, but you kind of can't. And it's non-structural, so to try to understand how we can open that up to increase line of sight here to the new YA space where that existing cafe sits, introduce the potential of a couple of meeting rooms, transition some additional office space back here. We talk about reallocating some of the collection to make a little bit more sense. And then trying to enhance this outdoor landscaping for more functional programming space in hopes that we can segment it from the parking so it's safe, but also engaging space that when there are activities, you can literally walk through it to get into the library, to my earlier comment. And events happening in this large meeting room could lead out into this activity one. The other one is, because this is such a unique design, it's an earth-bermed concept. What you're running into is there's not a lot of daylight back here. I don't know everything. I know a little bit about the original design intent. The drawings we have actually show skylights back here. I assume budget didn't allow it. But I think it would be an interesting way to introduce daylight back into those, especially in a children's area.
Zach, that was my last question I had written down. Was I don't wonder, and Stan's not here, I don't know if Stan said anything, but from a facility standpoint, skylights are always problematic. They always leak. They always end up leaking. Certainly problematic when you have collections that are dying. So I don't wonder if they were taken out because, you know, strictly a flat roof does. But I was going to ask if the question is it daylight that's needed or is it lighting? Is there a way to accomplish that without a skylight?
There is. So LED lighting is getting unbelievably good in fading natural light. They make circadian lights now that fly clouds moving through the sky. I could fake a skylight pretty good. One of the things that I think is interesting, so I think better lighting, preferably daylight, but better lighting, especially with children's department, should be a priority. The other thing that I think is an interesting opportunity here at Oakland is you have this wonderful vegetated growth. Kind of get a sense of the building footprint here. The rest of it, you can't tell walk on top of the building or not. Is to try to understand how we could turn this into an extension of the actual library experience, not only from the front door, but from the street. This doesn't have a lot of curb appeal for thinking like a retailer. I can't even really tell retail as a library from the street. So one thought was, if we were to pursue this idea of skylights, they can kind of get the sculptural elements and the science. I also think it'd be interesting to do an open air shade pavilion and turn this path more into what they call a story walk. So it's a children's interactive display. There's, I always forget the number, 16 or 18 stations.
I think actually it's 20.
Because it's so the hope is to turn that into something that could be an interactive experience and couple that with the idea of turning this more into a true butterfly garden. I think it'd be a really powerful way to leverage an asset that you already have into more of an extension of the library experience.
On a property like this, you also have a very nice grassy buffer area to the east. You know, on the other side of the park.
Oh, here, yeah.
It's actually a fairly large area.
Yeah.
Does something like that, as you can see there, is that something you stay away from because it's away from the building, or do you ever look at, hey, this is an asset to the library? Does it make sense to have outdoor areas for reading or relaxation or something like that?
I think
Because oftentimes you see in parking lots where it's nice and shaded, you'll see people sitting in their cars reading.
yeah, I think library design, even out to the ends of the site now, a lot more in common with airports than they used to. If I can't plug in a phone under that tree, I'm not considered for any long period of time. So even in spaces like that, what we've done is put pedestrian lights in with charging stations. So if you're not willing to make that investment, I think it's an interesting strategy, but likely won't be used over long periods of time. A space that size might be better positioned for larger events, making sure that we can painlessly set up a tent for events. That we can attract people from outside our normal Oakland users to come to the library. It's right next to parking.
Yeah, you got concerts. or
Yeah.
something like that.
And that, I think, would be an interesting way to leverage some of that space. So then, Red Bank, similar to McCullough, we looked at opportunities to expand the site, provided some challenges. You actually own some of this property over here, which almost kind of walk off the cliff right about there. It's the smallest regional branch. It'll show in some of the busyness assessment. There's just a lot crammed into this structure. There are some things I think we could do. There are some possibilities of adding some meeting rooms with some additional square footage. Long story short, I think this is a very good building. It's in good shape. If we were to pursue the idea of a new regional location in that Red Bank area, I think releasing that asset and using that against the cost of this new library could make a lot of sense. Because I can see definitely reusing that existing building for a lot of different things. And probably work better as a bank or an office than it might as a library. The current way we're using libraries. So similar to the regional location, we try to give you a series of site criteria. Again, whether it's new construction or taking over an existing space, what are we looking for if we started actually getting online and seeing what was available. Little less concerned about walkability, but I never say don't worry about it at all. At the regional level, I think what you're more worried about is we find a location that I could run some errands, and the library would be one of them. So when you look at the SWOT score, all it's really doing is measuring what amenities are within a quarter mile. It might not feel very walkable, but at a score of 35, at least I'd be able to go get a gallon of milk, go to the post office, go to the library one trip. And that's important, I think, at the regional locations. And that's what works good about it now, is you very much could do that in this current location to try to make sure we retain some of that convenience for the patron. I think it's important at the regional level. The other one was in the survey, we specifically asked if anyone thought there was a need for an additional location that we currently don't have. There was an overwhelming response to this upper third of the county, I'll say, which was C, E, and D. And it's supported by a lot of the socioeconomic data that I think doesn't surprise anybody. But trying to understand what that meant and where, I think the criteria for site selection here at this level of detail will be the same as what we offer for Red Bank. The question is just what's available, what would work best. It's a new location within that community. So we're looking at a prototype for a regional concept similar to the neighborhood. We're looking at about 20,000 square feet on 4 to 6 acres. That's largely dependent on parking needs, whether or not it needs to be on our site or not. With a collection of 70, 80,000 meeting room capacity across multiple types of meeting spaces of 75 to 100. Very organized similarly, it's a bigger footprint. And here we're also trying to understand programming is different at regional. We can take on a little bit more of an aggressive approach to what types of programming we can handle. The idea of consistency and specialization. You could have made the decision in 2000 that you wanted to start having branches that all look like each other. You did not do that. They're very, very unique. And it's a very interesting way of going about it, allowing each region or neighborhood to have its unique brand and identity. With these potential of new ones, if they are new construction, it begs the question, what's the identity of the regional location? Is it lodge? Is it sustainable? What is it? Which could be an exciting way to engage.
Can you go back one screen? Per site.
Depending on parking and stormwater. Well, if we could find a site that we did not have to do stormwater or parking, that's half that number. But those are becoming less and less. But if you were looking at space to rent, I mean, that's exactly what would happen. So, but depending on where you develop it, yeah, you're north of 4 acres. Last is central. Again, no substantial recommendations here, but a series of moderate steps that I think likely need to be addressed in some way. Not least of which is HVAC upgrades. If you look at the exhibit and the piece of, or the facility assessment, there's about $450,000 worth of deferred maintenance just in the HVAC system of this building. And it's just getting to the age where I think that needs to be something that this group is starting to get through. What this is doing is recommending some modest architecturally modest renovations to the building. Culturally, from a staff standpoint, make a bigger difference. It's trying to understand new furniture here. There's some issues in the parking garage that we're currently trying to understand and define a little bit more detail for you. There's some water infiltration because the parking garage that we had from day one.
Maybe we could turn that into a water feature.
We'll put a fountain below it. Call it a day. We're reorganizing, consolidating staff space. This is your teen area now, but I think what our recommendation is we turn the volume up there, make it more of a vibrant, engaging teen space, and leverage that existing cafe as an extension of that, and try as best we can to make a more public access point to this courtyard. I'll call north of the cafe. Right now you get to the, it's an interesting example of signage. You walk by a sign that says staff only to get to the door that leads to the public plaza. For the people that actually read signs, it looks like they're not allowed to go out there.
Yeah.
So they're trying to understand how to turn this really nice asset into something that's more utilized by patrons. Moving upstairs, largely nonfiction up here. We'd like to start to think through this more as an incubation space. So to treat meeting rooms and business incubator areas, take some of these alcoves here and turn them into collaboration spaces so that all of this becomes a place for collaboration meetings, innovation at more of a system scale. You have these two iconic rotundas on either end that might be some of the better interior space in all of downtown. So try to repurpose those as really meaningful places. One thought was that one could be loud and one could be quiet. And one's a reading room, but one's also an active space where you can come and collaborate, and Instagram and all that kind of stuff that I think is iconic to this library. Again, reorganize some of the staff space, more formally identify a makerspace on the second floor, and try to make that as an extension of this. We also are trying to think through how to better understand the wayfinding here. The odd thing about this building is you come up the stairs, but the reference desk is to your back. So a lot of people get lost and understand where they go. So this is moving that reference point. That's
We
one
have
of
a-
the things.
We have a small little reference, I don't know, it's a reference desk, but now when you come up the top of the stairs, there's somebody there.
Yes.
But it's just transition this desk here, correct? Big one here.
Yeah.
And the third floor is, again, work through some staffing and try to just reorganize and make that more efficient, free up some space where we can. Lastly, and not to make them sound insignificant, is to try to understand how we can better enhance these outdoor spaces. We talked about this outdoor plaza here, but also the entrance plaza. You know, it's a wonderful opportunity to have that corner location there, especially with everything that's going around it and being built in downtown Evansville. But then the last one is to try to understand a strategy to redevelop this community green, whether that's an extension of library or a partnership with another organization, to see what could happen on that parcel of land that best benefit the library and patron experience. So the last thing we did is try to prioritize this on what we thought was urgency. Not necessarily saying you had to do this in 3 projects or in this linear order, but just understanding the buildings and talking with staff and the community. It did seem to us there was a logical tier to which ones felt like they had more urgent needs, especially if we're looking at this as a 10-20 revision. That first group would be Stringtown, Red Bank, McCullough, trying to understand what those need to happen and how fast can it happen. Beyond that, to talk about the possibility of feasibly addressing some of the issues at East and West, and then considering whether or not we have the appetite for any location to react to the growth out north. And then third was North Park, Oakland, and Central.
Where did those micro location questions come in?
So I put it down here. I think they're largely gonna, the speed of which those would happen will be your ability to, or willingness to invest in the local. More likely is how fast we develop partnerships. With the exception of exterior. Yeah. Beyond that, partners at the local level. A real relationship with that.
And Lord, the $100,000 for bookmobile, I thought we purchased a replacement.
We have 2 outreach vehicles. They're not necessarily a bookmobile. One of them that was purchased that we decided to get the Ford Transit Connect wagon, so that as we had more people going to events like the Toyota Biobots that we used to co-sponsor and host up at Toyota in the summertime, we could take more staff. And then we have the other one that's more like a small cargo van. So it's no means a bookmobile.
But we do use them to visit remote locations
Yes.
and take library materials to folks. They are equipped with hotspots, so they can provide limited internet access as well. So it's a small way of doing that at community events. They're community outreach vehicles, and we do take materials with them. They can circulate. They have laptops with them, and they do that. They make library cards when they go to events and things like that.
You say partnership, what sort of partnership do you need? Schools, churches?
Yep.
Boys and girls clubs?
Anyone that I think would help leverage a more diverse audience. So Boys and Girls Club is one that you hear a lot, because they're traditionally not library users. I'm not saying there isn't, but there's a lot of benefit of crossing those 2 groups. Because your library users don't necessarily understand the services they provide and vice versa. Do this at the neighborhood level. Both get bigger consumer base, which is really good.
Any other questions?
The only question I have is can we have an opportunity again, maybe to have you on like a Zoom, where we could do this again, maybe not need as, not as a, as a, or how we do that. Because there's just so much to digest.
Mhm.
And I feel like I've got a lot of questions and I don't know where to find that. Or if we have the parking lot for. Right?
Yeah, yeah.
Any other questions? Thank you so much. Great report, very comprehensive. All right. Announcements.
And just very briefly, because we need to move on to our finance committee meeting, I just wanted to formally welcome Robert Musgrove to the board and appreciate you. Hope you are enjoying your first meeting. And the second thing, I sent this out to the staff and to the board earlier, but I just wanted to publicly recognize Lisa Holstein, who won a national honor, the Raven Award from the Mystery Writers Association of America. And that's a very big deal. It's the highest honor you can get from that organization as a non-writer. So just wanted to mention that.
Any other business to bring before the board? That concludes our meeting. I adjourn this January 13th meeting of the Vanderburgh County Public Library Board. And now we will move on to our second meeting for the evening. I'd like to call to order this meeting of the Finance Committee and move to the first order of business, which is the election of officers. Our typical policy is to elect the same as the regular board. So the slate would be myself, Belinda Stubbs as president, and as secretary, Richard Clements. So do we have a second? We have a motion and a second. Any discussion? All those in favor of accepting this slate of officers, please signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Those opposed, nay. And that passes. Next on the agenda is the approval of the 2021 Library Board of Finance minutes. Do we have a motion to accept the minutes? We have a motion and a second. Any discussion? Hearing none. All those in favor of accepting the Library Board of Finance minutes of 2021, please signify by saying aye. And those opposed, nay. And that passes. Then the review of the investment summary report.
As part of the required Library Board of Finance meeting, I have to give a report of investments for the 2021 year. And in the packet that was emailed out to you, you'll see that our average daily investment balance with Trust Indiana is $13,190,517, and that's using the last day of the month as a dashboard or a starting point. And then they also, Trust Indiana also gives us an actual true average daily investment balance, and that was $11,643,460. And at the very bottom, you'll see we had a net increase from 12/31/2020 to 12/31/2021, and all four of our funds of $865,000 change.
Thank you, Lori. And then our last action item or business is the return of the 2019 outstanding checks.
In accordance with Indiana Code 5-11-10.5-3, our list of outstanding checks and warrants are now presented before the March 1st deadline, in which all warrants or checks that have been outstanding for a 2-year period or more as of December 31st, 2021 will be returned back into our cash balances. And therefore we had 3 checks as they were listed on the report. One to Earlham College for $60, one to Jonathan Key for $27.95, and one to the Marion County Public Library System for $7.99, or a total of $95.94. And that will show as revenue in our 2022 budget.
And I believe we need this in the form of a motion.
Yes, please.
And a second.
Second.
Any discussion? We have a motion and a second on returning the 2019 outstanding checks. All those in favor of that action signify by saying aye.
Aye.
And that's opposed, nay. Any other business to go before the finance? All right, then our finance meeting is adjourned. Thank you very much.